Hello boys and girls. Here's video number 2, multicellular organisms combine to form tissues and organs. This can all be found in your textbook. I've never had this PowerPoint set up before. I just quickly did it up, so might not be as entertaining as some of the others, but let's get through it. The first question I have is, why are single-celled organisms so small? We talked about this in class when we were talking about the amoeba and how they were so tiny and they engulf organisms like the paramecium and whatnot in that video we watched. Imagine if they were huge, massive, kind of like those big 80s horror movies like The Blob. Okay? Why is it important that they are so small? Okay? They are small simply because there's limits to how much they can grow. They can only grow so large. Okay? But why do you think there's these limits? Okay? Why can't they get any bigger? The reason for this is because of vital processes, okay? The vital process that we're going to talk about here are diffusion and osmosis, which hopefully you guys are all experts on after watching the egg videos and whatnot, okay? So the example is oxygen. Oxygen itself is needed by all these different cells. Oxygen takes a fraction of a second to move over a short distance of 0.1 millimeters, okay? For a small cell, that's perfect, okay? That's absolutely perfect. The cell doesn't need to be super large and worry about getting the oxygen because it takes a fraction of a second to go over 0.1 millimeters. However, if they need to get that oxygen quickly and the cell is not very small, let's say it was very, very large, that's where the issue would come in. Okay, in order for the oxygen to diffuse over a distance of say 1 millimeter, okay, it takes several minutes for that to happen. Okay, by time that actually happened in a large, scary blob-like monster, that organism would die. It would suffocate. It would not have enough oxygen in its body. Okay, that leads to another important function: cell reproduction. Okay, we talked about this earlier in the semester when we talked about reproduction and how all living things require reproduction. They have to reproduce in order to be considered alive. However, single-celled organisms, they only have one cell. They don't reproduce sexually like we or other organisms do. Okay? So cells and unicellular organisms reproduce as well, but they do it differently than single-celled organisms. As they grow and develop, these cells eventually get too big. Okay? So they don't end up by just getting fatter and fatter, taller and taller, bigger and bigger. They end up by getting to a certain size and they stop. They stop growing. Okay? Once that happens, they just reach their limit and they split. Okay? They split into two identical copies. Okay? This is the process that occurs on our bodies. It's happening right now on our bodies, replacing all the cells that die naturally, as well as any cells that get hurt. You go and you cut yourself, it's replacing your skin cells. Hey, I got a cool little video here. Let's give that a shot. We have specialized cells in our body. Okay, single-celled organisms, they're all the same. They all have the same structure and function. However, multi-celled organisms like us, well, we're not. Okay, so because of that, we have cells that are specialized for specific functions. And we're going to talk about one specific cell here, and that's our red blood cell. And we'll talk more about red blood cells when we get into the circulatory system and when we start talking about diseases and whatnot. But our red blood cells are a perfect example of a specialized cell. The function, if you're not sure, if you didn't know, the function of the red blood cell is to carry oxygen, nutrients, and waste throughout the body to the other cells that need them. So the nutrients, like the nutrients and the oxygen, go to the cells. When it gets to the cells, it picks up waste like carbon dioxide and waste produced through digestion and takes it and gets rid of it out of our body. Very, very important. If we didn't have those, we wouldn't be surviving. To make room for all of these things that the cells have to carry, the red blood cell, it ends up by having to sacrifice something. And that thing it sacrifices is the nucleus. So we talked about the nucleus earlier in the year when we said how the nucleus is the command center of the cell. It tells the cell what to do. It's also where reproduction occurs with chromosomes and whatnot. The red blood cells actually lose their nucleus. They lose the nucleus in order to have extra space to carry all the needed materials throughout the body. Okay, that means the red blood cells cannot reproduce through the type of cell division that you saw in that Big Bang Theory video. So they have to be reproduced through a different type of tissue that's in the body called marrow. And you may have heard of bone marrow and may have heard of some diseases such as leukemia that affect that affect the production of blood cells. Okay, so you can see that the red blood cells need to work with other parts of the organism in order to survive. The red blood cells are not on their own. They're working with other things or other parts of the body in order to do their job. That leads us to tissues. We've talked about tissues already. Okay, you may remember from the earlier lesson we talked about the hierarchy of how things are organized. Okay, the smallest living unit of life is the cell. The cell is the smallest part. It's where we start. Okay, then if we take a group of cells and put them together, we end up by getting organs. Okay, take a bunch of these organs, put them together. A group of cells make up. Oh, I put a typo here. Group of cells actually make up tissues. This should be right here. Our organs are made up of similar tissues, and then a group of organs that work together, they end up by making up our organ systems. I'll change this one word right here. Hopefully you see my arrow. I'll change that to tissues. Okay, our organ systems work together to make us us. So we have the digestive system, reproductive system, circulatory system, etc., etc. Okay, there's differences between animal tissues and plant tissues. We're going to go into detail on both of them, the animal and the plant tissues. Okay. First off, humans and other animals, all of our cells are organized into 4 different tissue categories. And these are things you're going to have to remember. There's connective tissue, nervous tissue, epithelial tissue, and lastly, muscle tissue. The connective tissue simply connects the different parts of the body. It's all in the name. Okay? So blood, fat, cartilage, bones, and tendons, these are all examples of connective tissue. And here's a beautiful picture. Okay? Don't worry about that picture for now. It just gives you an idea of what it looks like. You can see different organelles in there. You can see cell membranes. You can see some. Yeah, you can see the cells in there. All of those are just different tissues, connective tissues. After connective tissues, we have our epithelial tissue. Our epithelial tissue covers the surface of our body, okay, as well as the outside of some of our organs. Okay, skin and the lining of our organs, like the intestine, are examples of these. And we're going to talk about epithelial tissue a lot because epithelial tissue can be thick. It can be very thin, and these help in very, very important processes like breathing and digestion, taking the oxygen into our body, getting the carbon dioxide out of our body, as well as the different nutrients that we get from our food and whatnot. And here's a picture of some different types. You can see some of them are thick, some of them are small. Some of these terms you may have heard before, some of them you may not. We're not going to have to worry about each one of these different types of epithelial tissues. However, we are going to need to know that there are some that are very, very thin, so thin that they're only like 1 cell layer thick. So tiny, tiny things. 2 more animal tissues. We have the nervous tissue. The nervous tissue makes up the brain, spinal cord, nerves, all those types of things. We got an awesome picture here. I love this image. We're going to learn more about it when we get to topic 3.5. You're going to need to know the different parts of the nervous system, especially in higher levels. Finally, we have our muscle tissue. This is tissue that allows us to move. Okay? Cardiac muscle tissue helps the heart pump blood throughout our body. Smooth muscle tissue helps move food along the intestines. Okay, and I put a link to a video right here. Again, I'll throw the PowerPoint onto D2L. I'll also put the link on D2L. It's about a 10-minute video that talks about the 4 different types of tissues. Highly recommend you guys watch it. It goes into a lot of detail. It's probably geared for anywhere from grade 8 to grade 12. Just take out the important parts that we sort of talked about in this PowerPoint. Okay, and there's a beautiful picture of muscle tissue. Reminds me of steak, a nice juicy steak, right? That's what you're going to be eating and munching on. Plant tissue. Plants are a little bit different than animals. Plant cells are also organized into 3 different tissues. Okay, there's photosynthetic / storage tissue, protective tissue, and transport tissue. I'm not going to go into tons of detail here, but very quickly, the storage and photosynthetic tissue, that's where sunlight is used to produce sugar for the plant to use as energy. We all know about photosynthesis. We talked about photosynthesis many times, where the plant uses energy from the sun as well as water to create its own food, okay, as well as, also carbon dioxide to create its own food, which it's able to sustain its life. And then the byproduct is kind of important for us, that oxygen that gets pumped out. Protective tissue simply waterproofs and protects the plant. And then lastly, the transport tissue. These are tube-like cells that transport food and water throughout the cell. Okay, and there's a picture that wasn't supposed to pop up, but plant tissue is organized into organs that interact with each other, but the organs themselves are not the organs themselves are not organized into organ systems. Okay, the organs of a plant are the leaf, the stem, and the root. These are not things that are new to us. Right down here below, we've got a nice picture out of your textbook of a cross-section of a stem of a plant, and you can see in the stem, you can see all the different types of tissues outlined. We've got the protective tissue that goes around the outside. Look at that. Okay, we've got the transport tissue that's kind of sort of in the middle, as well as storage tissue that goes in the middle. Okay. We also have over on the side here, I apologize for that. Let me end the slideshow. We've got a cross section of the leaf, and again, it has all three tissues. It's got our protective tissue, our transport tissue, and our photosynthetic tissue. And lastly, we've got the tissues of the root, and the same thing. Along the outside, we have the protective tissue, we have the transport tissue in the middle, and then storage tissue in between the two. Okay. So that's it. That is the quick lowdown on topic 2.5. Definitely the big takeaway here is know your tissues, know the tissues particularly for the animal cells. For any tests and whatnot that I give, I focus heavily on the animals. We'll let the plants get worried about a little bit more detail next year. Definitely know they're there, but I'd put the main detail and focus studying on the animals. That is it. Hopefully you got a little bit something out of this. I'll try to throw it on YouTube. If worst case scenario, it'll be on D12. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.